There are 3 new cards out. All of them are pretty interesting. Let's take a look at Weapon X, Chamber, and Adamantium Infusion in Marvel Snap. We're going to start with Weapon X, who you are almost certainly going to see a ton of on today's hot location, but how is he outside of that? A 2/2 that scales ongoingly with each destroy. Sorry for the confusing wording. Not an ongoing ability, but he does sort of infinitely scale. Each time you blow something up, every 3, he gets another +1 on his ability. Technically, it could be infinite. In practice, it's a lot limited by you have to play this guy on turn 2, and that means you only have a certain amount of destroys, and there aren't really all that many cards that are going to be destroying more than 3 things at a time. It's kind of just Killmonger, so much like the predictions, Killmonger is very much Weapon X's best friend, and I would not expect to see any Weapon X deck trying anything without not just Killmonger, but also cards that give it multiple procs. This is a deck that almost every Weapon X deck has these same characteristics. A notable weakness to Mobius and Mobius, because you are also a death deck, and a notable weakness to Shadow King, because you are a Weapon X deck. But the numbers he gets to are good. You will be able to see a 17 power 2-drop. It's Thena-esque, although I think Thena was probably a little bit more conducive to different game plans, whereas this guy is the card that goes in Destroy. My analogy for him so far is somewhere between Collector and MODOK in terms of what he is for Destroy, using discard as an analogy. I don't think he gets up to the heights of MODOK, which is an irreplaceable card in basically every discard deck. I don't think he's that. I think he's a little bit closer to Collector, but I also think that unlike Collector, he is really only doing one thing. You will play Collector in things like Devil Dinosaur decks. They're not going to be good, but you'll do it. And you will not be playing this guy in anything that doesn't involve mass destruction. We are going to start with the obvious one, at least to me. I know a lot of people will consider Traditional Destroy the obvious thing to do with this card. I actually think Traditional Destroy might not be using him the best. That is, of course, a V-Hand Moon Girl deck. This is the deck that is going to be able to generate the absolute most volume of 1-drops in the entire game. So it is going to have the absolute best Killmonger Weapon X's in the entire game. If you want to play a deck that is optimized for making your new card as big, as cool as possible, this is the deck you want to play it in. Now, it's not that Destroy is bad. It's just that I'm less sure about that deck in terms of, do I actually want Weapon X? That's going to take some reps to find out. This deck, I think, pretty clearly is one of the few decks that is like clearly optimized for Weapon X shenanigans. I think it's a very solid card in this deck. The problem you run into, though, is that it is a card that you cannot really play late in a meaningful way, and you actually do feel like the relatively low base power is a downside here. When I reviewed this card, I was like, I kind of want it to be like a 2/4, and in this deck, if this was a 2/4, it would be like the greatest card ever, but it just isn't. So you actually do end up having to go, not necessarily off curve, but sometimes you have to weigh your plans against each other. Do you want to play 2 1-drops on 2, or do you want to play this guy? How does that impact how big he's going to be able to get? He can get big, but there are multiple things going on in this deck, a lot of things going on in this deck, and he's not always the right one to invest in, which feels bad for a deck that's sort of maximally built around him. I'm not saying this is a perfect list. I would go so far as to say it's definitely a tech card, maybe 2 away. But I was a little surprised at how decent this felt. Not to say that this is amazing or anything, but I've played some Dormammu in my time. It's a card that I secretly enjoy coping. And I kind of think that one of the things it runs into a lot of the time is just there aren't enough things on the board for you to get rid of. And so leaning into being a deck that wants those things on the board and wants you to get rid of them, I think is actually a pretty interesting direction for it. The biggest question when you're building a Weapon X deck is like, okay, how do I make a deck that I don't hate playing Squirrel Girl in? Because he's unfortunately kind of her best friend too. And so you really end up building towards Squirrel Girl, Debris, Killmonger. And what I'm worried about with a deck like this is you eventually look at it and you're just like, all right, well, if I'm doing this, I should probably just be playing Merlin instead. And if I'm playing Merlin, I should just take out all of this stuff and put in a good points package instead. And I think that's entirely possible. I think it's entirely possible that's the direction this goes. But for now, I actually was pretty surprised because a lot of the time you play a Dormammu deck, you run out of stuff on the board. I did not run out of stuff this time. Now, granted, I also probably wasn't doing enough stuff, but what can you do? Of course, Traditional Destroy, this is probably the hot location Altar of Death deck de jour. I mean, I can't imagine not playing Deadpool stuff in that context. It's going to be a hellacious day on the ladder. This is the normal Destroy deck, but I think it's worth talking about what you're giving up, because in this list, you're giving up Agony. So let's say you decide you don't want to give up Agony. Okay, well, then you're giving up other Wolverine, or you're giving up this guy, because you're really not going to be able to cut any of the stuff that goes boom just yet. Maybe when the Fastball Special comes out, we'll get Deathlock out of here. I'm not exactly sure, but I do think that this is the kind of deck where what he's there to do is to be there for you when you're spinning your wheels. And I think that's cool, but I'm not sure it's worth giving up Agony for, because if you look at how the decisions were made in this deck list, right, you would normally have Agony here, but we don't play Agony because that's not actually a one drop that actually gets us kills. So it doesn't go in the deck, and Wolverine does, because that is a thing that we can use to get multiple kills and make Weapon X bigger. I just can't imagine it's worth cutting yourself off from the ceiling for that. Like, I think it is entirely a reasonable thing to do, but I just can't imagine it's making the deck better. And I very easily can imagine it's making the deck worse. You're supposed to, I think, use Weapon X in this list as a sort of, I didn't draw a Deadpool Agony, so I'm doing like a smaller ball thing and I have like a 2-11 or something just by playing my normal game plan and like drawing a Killmonger, and I just don't know if that pans out. That is ultimately what I keep coming back to here. Like, if you just replaced the two Wolverines with Agony and Moira X, the deck might just get better, and that's not a good thing in the context of, you know, most people watch this video asking, should you buy the card? Next up is Adamantium Infusion, 4 cost on reveal. Revive your highest power card here with doubled power. That's a pretty specific effect that does some pretty interesting and pretty strong things. I think you won't be surprised by the decks I'm putting this card into. First up, just a chance at swapping out the Phoenix Force in the Jet deck. I'm unsure about this. I like the double. It's cool, but you do lose out on the big boy combo in this deck that you can get access to, which is manipulating the Elixir and Phoenix Force such that something that died on turn 5 gets revived by Phoenix Force, which then dies to a Kid Omega. Elixir brings back that same card because it is still flagged as having died last turn, even though it also died this turn and was revived. I think that cutting yourself off from that is meaningful. I think that Adamantium Infusion eating 2 board slots is meaningful. I also think this deck is just super duper underrated, and there's going to be a video on it with Jet coming out soon with the original build with Phoenix Force in it. So that's not a ringing endorsement for Adamantium Infusion, but I also think that it's entirely possible that Adamantium Infusion's targeting just makes it an easier deck to play. And I think that might just be the real thing happening here, because I don't even know how many people know about the Elixir stuff with this deck and the Phoenix Force, right? Like, if you don't know that's happening, then yeah, Adamantium Infusion is going to be a better card when you play the deck. And I actually think that's like 99% of people probably. That's not necessarily the most compelling reason to go pick up a Season Pass Premium, of course, but it is something that is really notable to me about how this deck specifically plays out. I'm pretty sure this deck is 1 card off, and that card is naturally going to be the card that comes out in about 2 weeks. That is, of course, Fastball Special. You could argue Elixir's off. You could argue Magic's off. I think that's fine. Really, the point I'm just trying to make here is this is a really good Nimrod card, right? Like, again, you Kid Omega the Nimrod on 5, you revive it and Carnage it, right? It's a 12 power Nimrod. You just Carnaged it. That's pretty disgusting. Like, that's just baseline, right? If you have a 7 energy turn, you get to do even more incredibly disgusting stuff. This deck gets really, really big. There are plenty of Shadow Kings running around and some Deafening Chords for your Kid Omega, so it's not the greatest space to be in. I've even seen some people running Stardust, which is crazy to me, but it is happening and it does beat your ass. And I assume that this is kind of why people are doing that again. I can't imagine what else it would be, even though I will say Hela is actually quite good right now. Don't tell anybody. This is a deck that has similar point output, but a little more built-in weakness to the Shadow King Deafening Chord metagame that we're in right now. I think it's really solid. I just think that right now it's awkwardly positioned because the premise of a deck like this is that you always crush the mid-range decks. And when they're Shadow King Deafening Chord decks, especially if they're like Shadow King Deafening Chord Merlin decks, which every deck is playing like 2 of those if you're playing a mid-range deck. You're just kind of looking at them like, well, I hope you don't do it to me, right? Like that kind of stuff is a little bit awkward for a deck whose premise should be farming all the mid-range decks. But I wouldn't be shocked if you're like, for some godforsaken reason, like a Nimrod one trick, you probably do want this card in your arsenal. Last up is Chamber, who is a 2/11, but only goes in tier 2 decks. It's a really incredible good card, bad deck kind of thing going on here. This dude is a blast. He does a lot of things that Marvel Snap has typically not put a lot of power into. This is a sick card that does fun things that typically aren't very good, and he makes them a lot better. Like, I've seen this guy be 15 power. I've seen some big chambers. It's not a weak card. It's just in awkward archetypes. But this is definitely a buff. If you're like Johnny Toilet Gamer. Now I realize if you're Johnny Toilet Gamer, you're looking at this card and you're like, an activate, that's so much work while I'm trying to wipe. I get it, but I think you can do it. I believe you can play one activate card in your deck that plays 1 card per turn. I believe in you, Johnny Toilet Gamer. Believe in me that believes in you. This card is strong. It's pretty much just on the fact that you have to commit so hard in deck building to make it strong. Another deck building masterclass from KMBest that took the already existing Isan ramp deck. I took out Penny Parker because she's bad, and I put in Chamber because he's a 2/11. That's the extent of my logic here. This is a deck that plays a million 5s. It is the most 5s of all time outside of Arishem. Spoiler alert. This is a deck that will play large Chamber, and frankly, it actually matters a lot because this deck is very often playing one big guy on the final turn of the game. So making sure you have a really cheap big guy makes it a lot more viable for you to just be like, I'm ahead in 2 lanes. Here's a big guy on the 3rd lane. That's usually just fine, right? Like, this deck has all the problems a ramp deck has. It's very much Arishem at home, but it does strong stuff that I think is honestly a little bit underrated. It's really good numbers, but they are fundamentally capped, right? So your only interaction is like, I'm turboing out a Legion or I have a Cosmic Ghost Rider, and that's kind of it. If that's enough, I actually just think this deck is good. Like, there is just actually enough meat on this bone that I think that this deck is, I thought it was like a very tier 2 deck. I would go so far as to say it's tier 1.67. I can't legally stop you from playing Nick Fury Chamber in Arishem, and it's probably good. Like, I don't know if it's the best thing you can be doing, but it is, as far as I can tell, the only time I would ever be caught dead playing Nick Fury. And I think that if that's what you want to do, this is probably the most fun you can possibly have. Like, a lot of people think of Arishem as like a no fun deck. I think if you're playing Nick Fury, you just get a pass on that. You're having fun. You're a fun gamer at this point. You are playing Sam Jackson himself. you're doing weird and random stuff. You're just gonna be out there playing draft mode, except you have extra energy. I think that's cool. Now, problem, I guess solution, right? Nick Fury after Chamber on 2. That's sick as hell, right? Like, you're super into that. You really hope you have other cards you can play, though, because, like, you want all your cards to be expensive, but you need them to be, like, 5s or whatever. Also, I mean, it's an Arisham deck. What else can I say? I do think that Chamber, this is a great example of the Chamber thing, right? Good card, very limited in scope. This is a big guy in decks that do not go exponential. None of the decks that scale with each other are copying 6s or things like that. They're all copying really cheap cards so they can play a bunch of them. That's how synergy works in Marvel Snap right now. It's a bunch of cheap stuff. So Chamber is forever walled off from that kind of like multiplicative or additive scaling. He's just going to be scaling linearly, where your opponent might have Craven, Sam Wilson, Batroc, and it's like, all right, that's 10 million points. He's not going to be as good as when your opponent has all their cards come together. But you can just get him basically every game, and he's going to be pretty solid. And I think that's really the use case for Chamber. If you like playing decks where you just play like one card a turn, this is your guy. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. In case you couldn't tell, I am very sleep deprived. The cat distribution system has worked. There is a baby cat kitty in my bathroom right now trying to acclimate to the house. So if all goes well, there will be another cat in this household in addition to the one you see jumping on me all the time during these videos. So I have not gotten a lot of good sleep. I hope the information was useful and compelling to you. Thank you so much for watching. I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.